is what I need. Now if you wanna get the best of me, got you smiling, that's for sure. Funny how you had the best of love. I don't know if I'll make it home. I don't know, not like I care. All I know, sound of disco. Only know I want the best of us. So I dance the night away when nobody's awake. Gotta be the last to stay. Dance the night away, no matter what they say. Dance the night away when nobody's awake. Gotta be the last to stay. Dance the night away, no matter what they say. 2 a.m. and you lost your friends. Pretend I don't know how this night will end. I feel your heartbeat, the DJ plays. Oops, I did it again. I don't know if I'll make it home. I don't know, not like I care. All I know, sound of disco. Only know I want the best of us. So I dance the night away when nobody's awake. Gotta be the last to stay. Dance the night away, no matter what they say. Dance the night away when nobody's awake. Gotta be the last to stay. Dance the night away, no matter what they say. That's the night away. That's the night away. That's the night away. That's the night away, no matter what they say. That's the night away. That's the night away. That's the night away. That's the night away, no matter what they say. That's the night away when nobody's awake. Gotta be the last to stay. That's the night away, no matter what they say.
Good afternoon. We're about to start. Please make your way into the room or outside, as you want. No more people coming in. It's funny, every time I start talking, everybody shuts up. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again to this second session of the Open Policy Meeting at APNIC 57. For the second session, we have two proposals, one of which will be online and the other one in person. And I will hand the mic to my colleague for the SIG administration.
I'll go there. Thank you, Bertrand. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So I think it was a fabulous lunch which we enjoyed, and after that we are back to work. The first item is taking you through the policy SIG administration. I am Anupam, my colleague Shaila and Bertrand are sitting on the dais. Next slide. This is the policy SIG charter. The purpose of this going through this slide deck again is to make sure that whoever has joined the room and were not in the first OPM1 could also see what is happening here. So the policy SIG charter is to develop policies which relate to the management and use of internet number resources. And it includes resource allocation, recovery and transfer, resource registration, within who is reverse DNS, RPKI, and related services. These are the two previous proposals. The status of Prop 152 is abandoned. Prop 153 is withdrawn. This was the OPM 1 agenda, which we just completed before the lunch. We discussed Prop 156 and 158. This session is OPM 2. We are going to discuss two more proposals, Prop 157 on temporary IPv4 transfer, which will be talked by Jody Pallet. Prop 154, resizing of IPv4 assignment for the IXPs, which will be talked by Aftab Siddiqui. Just to update the community that we had a policy proposal webinar on 15th of February. It was joined by 23 members, wherein authors read out the proposal and tried to get the feedback of the community. In terms of implementation of the proposal, these are the various steps. Whenever a proposal is submitted, it goes through the mailing list. We go through the consensus at policy SIG, consensus at member meeting. There is a comment period. Then there is an EC endorsement. And even after EC endorsement, there is an editorial comment period. And then finally, it moves to implementation. We worked on a consensus. Consensus is defined here. It is a general agreement taking into consideration comments on the mailing list and at the open policy meeting. In case of objections, which is a very important constituent of the entire consensus process, it is classified as minor objection or major objection. What is required in case of a major objection, that the person objecting has to come onto the mic and explain the reason for major objection. We follow the code of conduct, and the link is here. I'm sure you have gone through it earlier. In terms of gauging the consensus, three of us go through different parameters. Of those are mailing list discussion, discussion at the OPM, which happens right now, discussion at the AGM, and then also the vote, which happens at the confer. This is the confer, which I just talked about. The link is confer.apnic.net. You are free to place your choice, whether you strongly support, strongly oppose, or even if you are neutral, you should mark it as neutral. These are the reference documents. The link is there. And if you need a little more details, we are there to answer it for you. Thank you.
So next we'll be watching a video recording of Geoff's presentation, as he had to leave the country early.
Hi everyone, this is Jeff Houston again. I've switched from reality to a virtual avatar of some sort, because in actual fact, I need to be on my way to the airport because, traffic, and as I'm flying out this evening, I've been told to get myself there extraordinarily in advance. So this is me recording this earlier in the day. So my apologies for this, but we'll do the best of it. In the previous session, I talked about the state of addresses, as they are today. And in this next sort of very quick section, I'd like to muse about where it's going. What do we use addresses for? What is an IP address and where's it going? Because in some ways, we are, and as a community, concerned about how to distribute, organize, and manage and administer these unique tokens that underpin the internet itself and its operation. But I would actually argue that since the 1980s, the semantics of an address, what is an address, has actually been steadily changing. And what we used to think of addresses in the 1980s, which was an analogy of a telephone number, every telephone needed one, otherwise you couldn't call them, has actually changed quite distinctly. And I'd like to explore that a little bit and ask some few questions as to what that means for us who are concerned about the management, administration, stewardship of this collection of IP address tokens. So I'd like to start first with I mean, you've all seen these, sort of the projections of the amount of Internet of Things population over the next few years. And this one's from statistica.com. They're all much the same, up and to the right. In general, it's kind of linear. And of course, the numbering scale is scary big. You know, currently at the moment, according to Statistica, around about 17 billion things and rising to 30 billion things by the end of this decade. Now, I've seen projections that, you know, are twice as big, 10 times as big even, are the more outlandish ones, but these are scary big numbers no matter which way you look at it. But let's look at a different graph of the last, you know, 15 or so years and looking at it from the principle of the advertised host addresses. The purple V4, the green V6, and it sort of says in the routing system, if every connected thing had an address, this is where we are from 2019 to 2023, and doing the projections based on the data that I showed in the earlier session, this is where it looks like for the next 6 scale. And what you actually find is, of course, V4, as we've already pointed out, is going down, whichever way down is. And V6 is rising, but not in a spectacular fashion, at least not since 2019. And so you kind of go, if everything, every internet thing needs an address, then by 2030, we're out by 15 billion, you know, and how are we bridging that massive gap? Because the original promise of V6 was every device gets an address. No more NATs, no more translation, no more address sharing, no more uncertainty. The true network means that every single device gets an address. But I think we need to confront the reality that that's not true today, and it's not true in the future, almost irrespective of the level of V6 deployment. And if that's not true, every device is going to get a unique address, then how do we bridge that gap? So pull back and think about the overloaded semantics of an IP address, because an IP address does carry a burden. The theory was, and I'm citing the 1980s, an address is you. An address is every unique endpoint needs a unique address to distinguish itself from all the other endpoints. You're you because you have a unique address. The person beside you has a different address, so we can distinguish between the two. We use addresses in the routing system, and we use routing to direct packets to locations where you are. So an address is also a locator, because every unique address is associated with your location relative to the network. So it's not geography, but it's the equivalent in networking terms. Your network geography, your network location is communicated by an address. And of course, last and not least, you know, an address is useless unless I can send you packets. You can send me packets and I can send you. It depends on reachability. So in some ways, every address informs the network. Here's how you actually get packets to me. And that's the internal structure of an address, where the prefix part, to some extent, denotes approximately the network locale, where it might be, is distinguished from all the other various wheres. And the identity part, the identity field or whatever else is on the more detailed side, distinguishes it from all the other addresses on your local network. So who, where, and how. And that overloaded semantic is what we refer to as an IP address. Okay, so obviously we've confronted address scarcity. IANA ran out back in 2011. Progressively, the RIRs have depleted their pools. And you could argue, however, that we were doing address scarcity from the first point where someone on a dial-up modem shared that connection on their side with another computer nearby. that you had a single connection to the internet shared by a number of machines sharing the one address. And so address scarcity is not a recent thing. I would actually argue it's been a feature of the IP address architecture since about 1990, really, I suppose, if you get down to it. And this idea of addresses are scarce, let's push the burden slightly up in the architectural stack to actually allow addresses to be shared. And we responded to this by time sharing, particularly with modems. When you connected, you got an address. When you disconnected, the address was given to some other client. So we shared from a common address pool, and addresses were assigned from that pool only when they were connected. When you weren't connected, it didn't matter. And of course, the NAT address. We shared a single external address across multiple devices. Underneath this was a more fundamental thing. We turned a peer-to-peer network. Every computer is a peer connected to every other connected computer into a server-client world. Servers need addresses and uniqueness to some extent and somehow. Clients do not. And that asymmetry allowed us to do massive sharing at the client side. And of course, there are billions of clients and many, many fewer servers. So in some ways, the way we accommodated scarcity was by some subtle architectural shifts in the network to really make that sharing possible. So that client-server network was a key as to how we actually accommodated this. And we got rid of one part of that triumvirate of who, how, and who, where, and how. We got rid of the who, because client platforms don't need to be identified at the IP level with persistent identity. IP is not, for a client, a useful persistent identity token. We abstracted that up into the application layer and said, well, okay, I've done with my address for the moment. I'll dial, hang off, I'll stop using it. Here, take it and use it yourself as a client. And so no persistent identity at the addressing layer, no need for persistent addressing, no need for unique global address plans for the client population. Now, that took the pressure off. We had assumed, geez, back in 2005 or so, hardly remember, 20 years ago, that this industry would never run out of V4 addresses, ever. The concept, as we likened into the telephone network, of running out of telephone numbers would be catastrophic. Running out of IP addresses when everything needed an address to actually use the network would be catastrophic. And so the assumption, even as late as 2005, was the industry would get it together. They would organize and completely deploy V6 before the last IP address was used, so that we'd never actually have to confront, well, you can't connect, sorry, we're out of addresses. But when we actually changed the architecture of the internet and moved the, if you will, elephant to a different area, we found that we could share those addresses across clients, and we literally solved the scarcity problem without any need for V6 to actually save us. So here we are in 2024, still looking at a network which a little over a third run dual stack, and a little over 2/3 don't do V6 at all. But it doesn't seem to matter. The experience from both sort of pools of users is about the same. And the ability to offer digital goods and services to the entire population of the connected internet seems to be relatively uniform, almost irrespective of your addressing system and your means of connection. So now we have a new semantic for clients. You only need a persistent address for the lifetime of your connection to a server, and then you can hand it back. But interestingly, even that is being changed. We've talked a little bit in other sessions about the introduction of address agile transport protocols. And QUIC is a really good example of this, that in order to accommodate NATs in QUIC, the protocol itself accommodates addressing agility, so that if the NAT, because QUIC is UDP, changes the binding of the external address to the session, QUIC goes, not a problem, not a problem. I'll do a quick check to see if you're really you, a quick crypto check. And if you've just changed your appearance address, your external address, I will just keep this session running. 2 round trip times and we're back into it. So now I don't even need to use a persistent address for the lifetime of a session. I can use this persistent address for the persistency of, geez, 2 round trip times. And so all of a sudden, persistence is not a connection thing. It's just a short-term ephemeral token that the identity part of any session has lifted up from IP and moved into the application itself. QUIC as a protocol has abstracted that away from the infrastructure. And so now we look at servers. What's their minimum address requirement? Well, interestingly, if I'm running multiple locations, I can do this with a routing directed system using Anycast. And although it's relatively approximate, and Anycast does have some issues, minimally, I can do it. One Anycast address can service an entire multi-location service. And interestingly, it can serve it for all of the digital services that it hosts, because we don't use addresses to distinguish between www.a and www.b. That's a naming thing. So all of a sudden that differentiation happens up in the DNS, and service endpoints are DNS identified. And security, that domain name certificate, that DNS name is what says this is the authentic address. This is the place you intended to go. So oddly enough, where's addresses in the service domain? Well, it's back down to 1 per platform, totally minimal. And so servers don't need a panoply of addresses either. Most of the heavy lifting is actually done by the domain name system these days. And so now we've had this massive evolution in architecture where every attached endpoint had a unique address, 1980s, and now we're using names as aliases, not into IP addresses, but names as their own identity. Addresses are no longer isomorphic to identity. And so this persistent sort of network level identity has literally been thrown away, particularly for clients and even for servers. It doesn't identify the service, it just identifies its location, and it could be multiple, think Anycast, and everything else is being done in the naming system, not in the addressing system. So today's network, if you think about it, is not an address-based network. It's a name-based network. Names give you identity, authenticity, and security. Addresses are merely the semantics of location and forwarding. They're not identifiers anymore on either side of that connection. That's a fundamental shift. And when we talk about the transition to V4 to V6, I think we're talking something that was important 30 years ago, but it's not important today. It's not the same issue, because we've substituted that by confronting scarcity and actually worked towards a different internet architecture that does not rely on that underlying view that every connected device has a unique IP level identity. And so is IPv6 a part intrinsically of what we're doing today? And the answer basically is, well, no. We have, by any reckoning, 10, 12 billion things, maybe 20, maybe 30, connected onto the internet. But they don't all have a unique address. In fact, the addressing sort of extent is 1 billion unique addresses in V4, slightly more in V6, but only 30% of the world does 6. So if you look at the entire internet, because it's dual stack at minimum and V4 only, those 3 billion addresses are doing the entire work of connecting more than 10 billion devices. V6 doesn't change that picture. So V6 is kind of overtaken by events. Who knows? Anycast lets the servers share addresses. We're now starting to think of the idea that if you connect to a data center in, I don't know, Amsterdam and use address 3, and I connect to a data center in Bangkok and use address 3, who cares? Is that clash meaningful? I'm talking to Bangkok, you're talking to Amsterdam. So what? So it's not really that big an issue anymore. We can actually start thinking about locally scoped client-side addresses if we really want to move on with this, and even further push addressing down into ephemeral session tokens and not much else. And then comes the really deep question, If we don't need permanent, globally unique addresses, the original selling feature of the IP network architecture in the 1980s, if we don't need that anymore, then how many persistent global addresses do we really need? How many? 4 billion? Humpty million, squillion, million and 2 to the 128-bit addresses? Or maybe 100? It's anyway something to think about here as we contemplate the future of this, that in confronting scarcity in addresses, we've oddly enough found it easier to change the entire architecture of the internet than we have to actually make an ever larger, globally unique address distribution system work in a cost-effective manner. And for that, I thank you for attention. If you're really lucky, I'll be able to dial in and answer any questions, but if not, I will leave it to you to think about further and ponder. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. So there won't be any questions because he's not here to answer. But if you have any comments and you want to share them, please step up and go to the mic.
Lee Howard, IPv4.global by Hilco Stream Bank. I think it's about the third or fourth time I've seen more or less the presentation on how many addresses do we need, and there's this new architecture. I will posit that we should ignore that because we have the address space before us that we have before us, and we should work on the policies for the address space that we have. And I look forward to Jeff Houston's internet draft describing a 4-bit address space.
Any other comments? Oh, Jeff? Anything on Zoom? Nope. So I'll leave the mic to Anupam for the rest, for the next item.
Okay, the next item is a policy proposal by Jordi. Do we have Jordi online?
Yes, I am online. Can you hear
Nice
me?
to Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so I can start already?
Yes, you can. Will you be sharing your presentation?
Yes, I am
Okay.
sharing already. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so proposal 157 version 2, temporary IPv4 transfers. When we discuss it through different workshops and policy proposals in the community, the need for leasing, we didn't realize that there is already a mechanism that it may be accommodated to be equivalent to leasing, which is making what we have today as transfers, but making them also temporary transfers. The point is to ensure that the people that is getting addresses is complying with the actual policies. So we can keep the control of the registries and the security of the return of the addresses when the leasing period concludes. The idea basically is also to ensure that this type of temporary transfers are a benefit for the region. So I am proposing them to be only inside the region, not which other registries, not which other regions. So the objective of the policy is to allow permanent and temporary transfers, not only permanent as we have today of IPv4 addresses. What is the situation in other regions? Only in RIPE, NCC temporary transfers are allowed. Actually, there is not a concept of leasing in the definitions of RIPE NCC policies, but is not either explicitly prohibited. In AFRINIC and LACNIC, neither leasing or temporary transfers are allowed. However, we have an equivalent proposal submitted also in LACNIC. In the case of AIRIN, temporary transfers are not part of the actual policies, and leasing is not a valid justification of the need. When leasing addresses, no more addresses can be requested. Additionally, certain blocks of AIRIN cannot be leased. So what are the changes that I am proposing? In section 11, IPv4 transfers, we add some new text. As it's not too much text, I am going to read it. In the case of temporary IPv4 transfers, a public log, let me move the screen, otherwise I cannot read. A public log will contain the initial date of the transfer as well as the final one. The final date must be updated if the transfer period is extended by agreement of both parties, which must be legitimized by APNIC. The extension must be anticipated by a minimum of 30 days before the previously agreed end date. And in case of temporary transfers, APNIC will restore the original registration information in the WHOIS database when the transfer period is over. Then in section 11.1, I just make small modifications. I put them in blue in the text in the right of the screen. So instead of just IPv4 transfers, we will have now IPv4 permanent and temporary transfers, and then exactly the same in the paragraph below. Section 11.1.1, we add just a new condition on the space to be transferred, which says in case of temporary transfers, the maximum prefix in total that a single recipient can get is /22. Why we say here in total? Because the point is that we don't want that a single recipient can start doing 1/22 from different sources, okay? The main idea of this proposal is to help with the transition of IPv6, not only, but that's the main point, and which a small prefix, a small IPv4 prefix, it should be enough for doing the transition, for example, using 464xlat. Section 11.1.3, conditions on the recipient. There is a new condition in the case of temporary.
Aviso de calendario.
In
Día
the
de las
case of
Islas
temporary.
Baleares.
In the case of temporary transfers.
Aviso de calendario. Day of Balearic Islands. Balearic Islands.
In the case of temporary transfers, the plan for usage will match the initial expected transfer period instead of 24 months. And then finally, a totally new section with additional conditions for the temporary transfers. And this text is the one that has probably most of the changes from version 1 to accommodate the impact analysis from the staff and also some inputs from the community. So this section, additional conditions for temporary transfers. Temporary transfers are subjected to additional conditions that must be warranted by the transfer contract among the parties. Must include terms of immediate transfer cancellation in case of usage of the resources for network abuse. The recipient must have an ASN to announce the transfer resources. The recipient must have operational IPv6 when announcing the IPv4 transferred resources. The recipient must have RPKI for the transferred resources. The IRR and geolocation must be correctly updated. The recipient must follow manners best practices. The source is responsible, and this is one of the main changes. It's making clear that it's not a task for APNIC, but the source is responsible for the oversight of those conditions. APNIC will be able to establish operational practices to ensure compliance. In case of lack of due diligence by a source, even with different temporary transfers or recipients, APNIC will initiate a warning which, if ignored, will trigger the immediate revocation of the resources involved. Advantages: it allows to obtain resources on a temporary basis in order to facilitate IPv6 deployment in a convenient and cheaper way than permanent transfers, which is especially important for smaller organizations and newcomers. I don't see any disadvantages in the proposal, and I don't see impact on existing resource holders. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Jordi. Any comments or questions from the floor? Just a reminder, please state your name and affiliation before starting.
Jonathan Brewer, New Zealand. I work with a large number of small providers who have IPv4 only networks. And 2 years ago, one of these providers had a commercial situation that had the technical staff and some of the owners locked out of their network. They needed to have temporary IP allocation to get their network back running. And this did happen in a number of days. Their 500 or so rural customers for whom their wireless connectivity is their only connectivity were back online. They don't have IPv6. I think this requirement for people to have IPv6 in order to have a temporary transfer is ridiculous. So I strongly oppose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if I can say, the main reason for this proposal is because I believe, and I am sure I am not alone in the community, that the reason for getting the usual reason for getting the temporary transfers or leasing is because you need some more space to move to IPv6. So that's the reason we have this requirement.
Okay.
I
thank you,
think the
Jordi.
situation that Jonathan described probably needs some special emergency policy in case of special situations, but that should be something totally different, and that probably could be resolved with the proposal that has passed today already.
Okay, Jordi, we will hear the next comment.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Akinori Maemura from JPNIC. Thank you very much, Jordi, for the proposal. And I think that this temporary transfer would be, maybe we can practically can do this by the transfer forward and then the transfer back the same resource in the short period. So I don't really have a good point to have the new scheme of this kind of temporary transfer. And then yes, I do support your passion to behave in the internet routing system, for example, to the compliance for the manners or some other effort it is required for this system. But it is I would like to have a bit more elaboration how it can be implemented in APNIC policy scheme. Without those elaboration, I am not able to support this proposal. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jordi. Any comments?
Maemura, if I can ask, I didn't understand your first point very well. Can you restate it?
Yes, the temporary you are proposing establishing the temporary transfer. But the temporary transfer is sort of transferring this kind of the handling can be realized by the transfer it to the one certain holder and then transfer back again to in a short period. So I think this is possible even if the current policy setup. That's my point.
Okay, I understand now. I am not sure that's possible because I don't recall right now on the top of my head the exact wording of the actual policies for transfers, but I think there is a minimum period, and it may happen that you need transfer for a shorter period, and then you cannot retransfer again so quickly. So I am not sure that's actually possible. and I believe it will be more complex than using what I am proposing here. Regarding the implementation of the, I understand what you mean is the additional conditions, what that I had in my last slide. What I am doing now is not asking APNIC to do that by themselves, but just ensuring that the contract between the source and the recipient contemplates that. So APNIC basically will only oversight that at a very high level in case something is really broken. And typically that will only happen with a source that is playing, let's say, nasty games. So it will be easy to understand that their contracts are not being followed or things like that. I think that resolves the problem, and it was actually one of the key points of the impact analysis, as I mentioned already, from version 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much for I acknowledge the second point. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sunny.
Thank you, Chair. Sunny Chandy from Secretariat. We published the impact analysis for all the proposals. I'm not sure how many of you actually looked at it, but I just want to read one of the point from that impact assessment for this proposal. Based on the current wording of the APNIC fee schedule, these temporary transfers would be applicable for temporary the transfer fees. So I just want to let the community know here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I responded to that in the mailing list. I think that's fine. It's up to the EC to decide, and it's actually in the justification of the proposal. It's up to the EC to decide if they want to keep the same fee scheme for the temporary transfers, or they want to do something different. That's out of the scope of the policies.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Matthew Enger from LeapTel. We are a small provider, so this policy potentially for some of my competitors, but even for us who are looking for IPv4 space as a new entrant to the market, it gives us options. My concern about this is that the /22 limitation for small providers is not necessarily going to be enough. If we need to grow, and we do need to grow, sometimes we just need to be able to get IPv4 resources, and buying them on the open market isn't actually an option for us. So I kind of feel like the /22 limitation is probably not really going to help the small ones in the longer term. Yes, moving off IPv4 to IPv6 would be wonderful, but forcing or linking IPv6 to this, I feel, is a little unfair, because not everybody can go to IPv6 for various reasons. The small guys may not have the right equipment to do it, and to say to them that they can't actually use this procedure because the equipment that they happen to have for their small struggling business doesn't support IPv6, and trying to imply extra limitations such as manners on them, it just seems unfair. And we're linking two different things together, which we shouldn't be. This should just be focusing on IPv4 only. And that's why I'll be strongly objecting to it.
Thank you, Matthew. Any comments, Jyoti?
Matthew, I understand your point, but what I am hearing for you is that in some cases, you are not yet planning to move to IPv6. So then you probably may need a bigger prefix, a bigger IPv4 prefix. And then it's probably something that you need for a longer period. In that case, I think it makes sense for you to go for a regular transfer, for a permanent transfer, not a temporary one. So this proposal is not trying to resolve that case.
I'm thinking about, in my case, my network supports IPv6 and we are dual stack and we are offering it to our customers. A lot of our customers are not wanting to go onto IPv6, and they're the ones resisting. It's not our side. So there are a lot of small providers using network gear that they've bought secondhand that doesn't support IPv6. I'm not one of them. And I feel the linking of IPv6 as a requirement is forcing on them something that's unnecessary.
Okay, Matthew, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please.
Oscar Robles from LACNIC. This is a question, two questions to the author. What's the reason behind asking at least 30 days to agree on the extension of this temporary transfer? And second, what would be the consequence in case this is not, they breach that condition? What if they agree 5 days before to extend that temporary transfer. What is the author suggesting to happen afterwards?
Well, the reason for asking for 30 days is because I think it's minimum. There must be a minimum period of time, so the registry is not let's say needing to change the things in the last minute, because they need to update which the last end date for the transfer sometime in advance. If the registries tell me that they are fine if it's just 5 days, I have no problem in changing that to 5 days. But for me, it was trying to reduce a little bit possible overhead in terms of last minute extensions.
Okay, thanks, Jordi. Next.
Marco Schmidt, Ripe NCC. Again, in this capacity, I don't have an opinion about this proposal, but as in the Ripe NCC region, we have temporary transfers. As Jordi pointed out, I found it again useful to share a bit our experience. In our region, these temporary transfers, they have no conditions attached like in this proposal. And we have identified a couple of challenges with this no condition situation, not so much in that areas that Jordi has included in this proposal, but for example, we got temporary transfer request for 10 years, 19 years, which seems a bit strange because, and secondly, kind of related to that long period, there is of course the situation or the risk that the offering party might go through some changes in the meantime. It might even go in liquidation, out of business, terminate membership, and the question is then what happened then? And we actually raised that twice to the RIPE community, and this topic will be followed up. But I just wanted to make this comment here about these parts aware well. Thanks.
Thanks, Marco. The point that you mentioned about the possible liquidation of the source is actually resolved in the policy, because there is a specific text that says that at the end of the initially or extended agreed period, APNIC is the one returning the registries to the original source. So in that sense, if the original source is liquidated, I understand that it comes back to the registry because they are not paying for the fees, etc., etc., etc.
Thanks, Jordi. Any more comments or questions? Do we have any comment online? No.
I just realized that I didn't answer to second question from Oscar. I answered only the first part. My understanding is that if you don't extend before 30 days, what happens is that you will need to do a new transfer according to the actual policy text. So it's not a problem on that, but you need to initiate the temporary transfer again if you missed the deadline of the 30 days.
Okay. If you have not logged on to Confer till now, requesting you to log in. I'll request the staff to start the Confer. I will now make a consensus call. You will be given an opportunity to indicate whether you strongly support, neutral, or you object to the proposal, or strongly object to the proposal. If you indicate that you strongly oppose to the proposal, then you will be expected to explain the reason. If you strongly support the proposal, please put your hand up. Okay. If you support the proposal, please put your hand up. Okay. If you are neutral about the proposal, please put your hand up. Okay, thanks. If you oppose to the proposal, please put your hand up. Thank you. If you strongly oppose to the proposal, please put your hand up. Thank you. Would you like to come to the, oh, you have already come. Thank you. I have conferred. I will now confer with my co-chairs as the next step and come back. Thank you. I think this is the shortest conference which we had. As the community has failed to reach a consensus on this proposal, the chairs will send this back to the mailing list and the author needs to consider whether it can be amended or should be abandoned. Thank you, Jody, for all your efforts.
I will
Thank you.
ask the people that strongly oppose and the people that oppose to please come back to the mailing list, restate what they said here. I am happy to work in a new version in just a couple of days or weeks, as soon as possible. I heard that the main concern is linking this proposal to IPv6. I am happy to reconsider that, but I really want to hear that in the mailing list, so we can also have a discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody, once again. Back to Bertrand.
Yeah, thank you, Jordi. As always, comments on the mailing list are easier to remember because you can go back to them as much as you want. Next on the agenda is AFTAB for proposal 154, resizing of IPv4 assignment for the IXPs. AFTAB, please.
Hello, everyone. If you all are feeling sleepy, let's not blame Jody for that. It was the food, because I am feeling sleepy. And unfortunately, I think the coffee, we ran out. So we all have to run outside and grab something. Okay, I'll keep you all awake as much as possible. Stay with me just for 10 minutes. And if just a hint, if you can find some interesting references in my presentation, I have a gift for you. Now, that would keep you awake. Yeah. Another hint, probably in the last 3 slides. All right, anyway, so this is not new. We came with this idea last year or in Kyoto. It's all blurry. But we came up with this idea quite some time ago that there is a possibility that some smaller IXPs or some smaller, some countries which doesn't have a lot of networks, don't call them small countries, some countries which doesn't have a lot of networks, do not require a minimum of /24 to run an IXP. We have some example. Equinix Mumbai is not the appropriate example because, of course, they are growing. It's a new one for them. And Mumbai being one of the largest cities in the region and in the world anyway, that is, of course, going to grow. But some countries, some cities like Ajax and Hobart, I mean, 7, you can probably have 20 at some point, or maybe a little bit more than that. You're not expecting to have 250 odd peers in Hobart. So there are limitations, of course, but there are big IXs. We saw yesterday in the peering personal that a lot of IXPs are hitting 200 plus peers. So of course they need a minimum of /24 or maximum up to /23, 24, whatever they have already. So this is the list of countries with a small number of networks associated or allocated by APNIC to them. You can see there are a lot of them. For example, the last one is Afghanistan and Mongolia with 94 networks allocated to them so far. Even if it grows to double, you're still talking about less than 200. So yes, everything can be squeezed into /24 for at least Mongolia and Afghanistan if they grow and they become double in next couple of years. But even, for example, all the other countries mentioned, economies mentioned in this list, even if they become double or 3 times the size they have right now, they still easily accommodate in a /26. So why they should get a /24? Again, it's example we have seen in the peering DB stats. Again, it's a disclaimer that not everyone update their peering DB data, so it's not an exact or accurate information. So in the APAC region, we have, of course, there are some economies with very few IXP. So there is a growth. There's a lot of growth opportunity available in the Asia Pacific region. We have seen that a lot of new IXPs popping up here and there in the region. Some bigger operators moving into the region, some community-driven IXPs coming up, and of course, some expanding to smaller tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. A recent example is Australia, IX Australia announcing that they are opening up in Tasmania, which is going to be tier 2 city in Australia. So of course, you're not going to get a lot of peers in that sort of cities. So the objective is to right now, whether it's an IXP or an ISP or any service provider apply for IPv4, they will get a maximum of /23. So what we are saying that an IXP by default should get a /26 unless they justify that they require more than /24, they can get /23 as it is. So we are not limiting it for the moment. I'll explain what, in fact, we are expanding their opportunity to have. We are giving them opportunity to have more IPv4 rather than just /23. I will, by the way, similar kind of policy is already been approved in RIPE. RIPE NCC is working on it. So hopefully we'll get some update from the RIPE NCC staff. This is the policy text. I would go here. That is much more important. So by default, you'll get a /26 of IPv4 block if you are applying as an IXP. Of course, but if you can justify that you need more than that, you'll get a /25 appropriately. And then if you can think that it is, you can grow in next 12 or 24 months, you should apply for a /24. There is no restriction. But you can go up to /22. That is the change as well. So if you think you can justify more resources, you can get up to /22. How many V4 you get today? The maximum you get is /23, whether you are a small, big, or large operator, irrespective of that. And in this scenario, you can get up to /22. Any existing IP that wants to open new POPs can request for more IPv4 addresses, which will be allocated using the same principle as defined above /26 and /25, as long as they do not go beyond /22. So they can get it. If you already have up to /23, you can get more. Today, if you have a /23, you cannot ask for more. So with this policy, you can request for more. If you are going to tier 2 cities, probably you can get another 2 /24 to cover that. Right. Global routability of the delegation outside this policy. For example, you are an existing member of APNIC and you have resources allocated to you. How do you announce those resources is totally up to you. But if this policy goes ahead and accepted, if you receive a resource, an IPv4 resource under this policy, you can't announce that into global routing table because it is for IXP LAN and IXP LAN should not be on the global routing table. And of course, we have set a recommendation that /24 IXP under this policy should be reserved by the APNIC. So advantages and disadvantages are there. Of course, if you want to grow in the tier 2 cities and in economies where there is no IXPs, then it's easy for you. You can get a smaller chunk. We are putting an assumption that if this goes through, then APNIC EC may consider reducing the annual fees for a /26 and /25s. Now, of course, I can't put it in the policy because that's outside the scope of the policy anyway. Impact IXPs who already became an IPNIC member and has less than IPv4 resources can apply for maximum delegation for their expansion. Maximum delegation that is up to /22. So I have created some FAQ in that just to answer some of the questions which was posted on the mailing list. So I have some question I'm going to answer myself. How much IPv4 an existing IXP can get today? Well, that's a /23 maximum because there is no difference between an IXP or an ISP in today's request form. How much IPv4 an existing IXP can get under Prop 154? Well, that is up to /22. Do all IXPs have to renumber their peering LAN? No. Only those IXPs who receive /26 or /25. Of course, if you already have a /24 and you are growing to become a /23 and you go back to APNIC and say, can I get a /24 again? They'll give you a separate /24. It's not going to be a contiguous one because it's very likely, it's highly likely that you're not going to get a /23. You'll get two /24, which is now quite normal these days. So how do you expand your peering LAN? That is the case today if you are expanding. So how will this policy facilitate? Oh, I missed one. Why can't IXPs use IPv6 only for peering? That was the question asked a couple of times in the past. And my answer at that time was, yes, absolutely they can. And this is the answer today I have. Yes, absolutely they can. Can you give me an example of that? Yeah, I thought so. No one is running it at the moment. You can run it, yes. And then same thing, you're putting an onus on the smaller IXP that you should run it on the IPv6, while I can't. I'm not running it because I can buy it from the open market. So that should be, I mean, this should be open to everyone. IXP renumbering is hard and takes a lot of time. Absolutely, renumbering IXP is hard, but that's not an uncommon phenomenon. IXPs do it today. Whether it is, whether you accept this policy or you do not accept this policy. You think it's not going to happen, it will still happen. So those, for example, as I mentioned, give you the list of economies where the number of networks are very low. For the likelihood of them renumbering it is absolutely very low. So we are talking about those economies, not for you or anybody else who are mostly living in metro areas. So that is the case in that scenario. Who will manage the reverse DNS for longer than /24? The same entity who is doing it today. So that is not a difference. Yes, APNIC has to update their infrastructure in some sense. And they said it in the last session, in the last meeting, that is possible. Now the last one. How will this policy facilitate the establishment of smaller IXPs without requiring a substantial investment in address resources? Well, this policy will enable smaller IXPs to launch regional exchanges where network density is very low. And I gave you the list there. Without significant investment in address resources, acknowledging that some of these points of presence may never expand beyond /26. And I gave you the example of Hobart. There are other examples as well across the world, across the region, I would say. But if you continue with the existing minimum /24, then those small IXPs operator may say at some point, well, I tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. But keep that in mind. I designed this in short time to explain this in due time.
Thank you, Aftab, and thank you for all the explanations at the end. It's way more clear than what it was the last time. So hopefully people will have comments or questions now. Yes, please.
Matthew Eng, I'm going to use my IAA hat for this one. IAA does content on our exchanges such as Facebook, and our caches need to have the IP prefix advertised in the global table. If we use one of the resources that was allocated under this policy would actually stop us advertising that into the global table, which means that we could not offer that Facebook cache. So I'm wondering if there might need to be some slight adjustment there for those IXs, especially the non-commercial ones who allow this content to come onto the exchange directly and host the content. to enable its members to get that benefit. And sometimes it just needs to be in the global table for specific reasons.
Yeah, but Matthew, that subnet is not part of your peering LAN, right?
No, it's not, but it probably would have come from the same allocation back a long time ago.
Yeah, so that's in this scenario, we are only talking about the peering LAN. For example, if I'm starting an IXP today, the maximum I'll get is /23. So I have to carve out a /24 from that subnet and give that to the caches, right? And minimum how many IPv4 do they require?
They require probably a small handful. They could be a small handful of IP addresses, depending on how much content you have, but it does provide a very good community resource to allow this content
There is
access.
absolutely no I do not have any difference of opinion on that one. I totally agree. But in cases, we are assuming that it is only for IXP LAN, and you still have to get some IPv4 outside of the IXP peering LAN to run such kind of services. Yes, I agree. Because what I've seen is that you minimum have to give them at least a /24 to run a cluster of caches, it could be Facebook or anybody else as well. So, and that grows as well. So if you're running multiple at Google or at Cloudflare and Facebook and then so on and so forth, there is no limit. That grows, your IXP peering LAN doesn't, right? So that should be different. That's a value-add service where you charge your members for.
No, we don't charge our members for it.
The port cost you charge, that's the value add you
No, we
create.
don't.
The value add you create to bring people to your IXP.
Yeah.
That's why they come to the IXP, right? That's the value add for a tier 2 cities or even economies. That's the value add you create. If it is only local content, that's not much local content in a small tier 2 city. So that's why you create a value add. That's why they come. So I would say that is a different service you're providing, and that should not be part of the peering LAN.
Okay, but the IXP itself would approach APNIC for an allocation. They can't get an allocation separate from this policy. They can only get an allocation under this policy because they're only allocated a /23 in total at the moment. And this policy would stop them being able to get an allocation for that. So let's say they got allocated /26 for their small IXP LAN, and then they wanted also to do some caching, which needed a global range to be advertised. They don't have an option to go and get it under the other policy.
So I would say this is, again, I agree, this is only for the peering LAN. So if you are, again, assumption is that APNIC EC will reduce the cost on the /26, then if you want to add more services, you go for another /23 block.
Don't think the policy APNIC will allow you to have a second initial allocation.
No, that's for IXP only. Yes, that is for IXP only. And then IXP peering LAN should not be advertised. That is the case how it is. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marco Schmidt, Wipe NCC again. As Aftab pointed out, in our region, this policy has reached consensus, and I'm happy to share some very initial data. It was implemented around 5 months ago, and since then around exactly 10 IXP assignments have been provided, 9/26, 1/25. So it seems to be working. So far, it's too early to tell that nobody came back to a number yet, but it's also a very short period. And what we also noticed, the amount of, let's say, questionable IXP requests that we received before has definitely dropped. So right now we get a request to get a /26 it seems to be working, at least what we can say for this short period of 5 months that we're working on it now.
Okay, and if I may ask that, is it coming from economies who are bigger or smaller economies? Do you have any demarcation of that?
It is mixed. It came from all different countries,
Okay.
Germany, Switzerland, and some other countries also.
Okay.
So mixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any more comments or questions?
Just a comment. Yeah. Could you explain on what is the pricing thing for right?
Yes, sure. In the RIPE NCC, we have a rather simple pricing model. So members pay a flat fee of 1,550 euros. And for independent assignments, and an IXP assignment would count for it, it's 50 euros per year annually.
Associate membership fees. But this, I'm not talking about that at the moment. So just a message to EC.
I am talking for myself. Parhar from India, talking for myself. A fundamental question. I've gone through it, it just struck me. Why you have asked for only IXPs? What about other small startups? I mean, we are creating a class within a class within a class. Basically, we are trying to do that. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Why, just for IXPs? Because we are in the fag end of our resources, and we have already got a policy giving for the startups. So why create another class? So it will be a new list.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure that out. If you can give me a little light on that.
Last night, a day before, we were having a discussion. Gaurav was there, Danny McPherson was there. So there's a lot of historical information sharing, I would say, or learning for us, some of us. When it was shared that there was, I'm forgetting the name, that someone came up with the idea that, listen, I'm not going to accept anything other than larger than /24 at all for IPv4. And since then, that's the case. So we can't do anything more than that. So it's anything, if I go with the, fine, everybody will get a /26, you get a /26, you get a /26, you get a /25. Who's going to accept that in the routing table? That's the point. So that's the problem. I mean, for the IXP peering LAN, that doesn't have to be in the routing table. So that still works. We did the proposal for allocating another /24, for example, /23 plus /24, and give more IP addresses to the newcomers who starts from 2024 onwards. That was the policy. But that it was not accepted by the community, so we dropped it at that time. So giving more IPv4 is, of course, not a acceptable phenomena in the community, but this one works. I mean, you can't further divide it at all for something to be routable on the internet. So this only works for IXP. Yes, it's creating another category of membership, but that can only work for IXP, unfortunately.
No more people wants to comment or ask AFTAB questions about this proposal?
Nobody told me the reference, so you're not going to get the gift. You have to come on the mic. Sorry, can't hear you.
Okay. So,
Bill Sandiford, Aaron Board of Trustees, In the End by Lincoln Park.
Well, because Lee played it and you were on the mic, so I think you both deserved it. Thank you so much for that, for paying attention. Yes, as I said, keep that in mind. I decided in a short time. So over to you, Chair. Sorry for blabbing.
okay. So now we'll make the consensus call. We'll bring on Confer. Remember to log in so you will be able to express your opinion. So you'll be given an opportunity to indicate whether you strongly support, neutral, oppose, or strongly oppose this proposal. If you strongly oppose this proposal, you'll have to explain why. And because I didn't see anyone coming in strongly opposing the proposal, I guess we won't have any. So if you strongly support this proposal, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you support this proposal, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you are neutral to this proposal, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you oppose this proposal, please raise your hand. Thank you. And if you strongly oppose this proposal, raise your hand. Ooh. Thank you. So we'll now confer with my co-chairs and I'll get back to you shortly. Congratulations.
Thank you. I was about to sing the whole song.
So the next step in the policy development process is to take this proposal.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
To the AGM and seek continued consensus there. The proposal will be then posted back to the mailing list for a 4-week comment period, and if required, that period can be extended to 8 weeks. Thank you, AFTAB, and thank you to everyone who participated today. I guess we are finishing a bit more than 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So it means that maybe we can get some coffee if they manage to fill the mashing up. And I'll see you tonight, obviously, at the Meet the EC meeting. Thank you all.
People are nice, but it's only for the tips. The weather's fine, but it's nothing I would miss. My only friends are the ones I left behind. Wish I could see them just for a moment. 'Cause I don't know anybody here, it's awfully lonely. I smile, but they just stare.